Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into some really fantastic material from Forge College on the core principles of integrating ecosystem protocols. Now, look, if you just finished deploying and validating your capstone dApp in our last session, seriously, huge congratulations. That's a massive milestone. But, well, you know how it goes. Now we face the next big engineering hurdle. We actually have to figure out how to wire up that beautifully pristine, mathematically pure application of yours to the, let's just call it the wonderfully chaotic outside world of Web3. So here's our game plan for today. We'll quickly cover protocol integration, compare contracts versus adapters, talk about managing surface area, build an Oracle adapter, and finally, hash out operational ownership before wrapping up. Let's jump right into part one, protocol integration, and how we actually bridge your dApp to the broader Web3 ecosystem. And that leads us straight to part two, contracts versus adapters. This right here is the ultimate architectural dilemma you're going to face. Okay, so before you write a single line of code to connect to an Oracle or wire up a webhook, you've got a choice to make. And honestly, this one single choice is going to dictate exactly how your integration behaves under stress, during network congestion, and, when those external protocols inevitably upgrade. You have two distinct paths, and the trade-offs? Yeah, they're pretty stark. On one side, we have the integration contract. Now, this is highly prescriptive. You are tightly coupling your on-chain and off-chain agreements. Both your program and the external protocol have to honor the exact account layouts and instruction formats. It's atomic, which is awesome, but it's also incredibly brittle. Upgrading it takes a ton of coordination. Think of an integration contract kind of like running a three-legged race. If your partner trips, guess what? You're going down with them. Now, on the flip side, we have the adapter pattern. This acts as a translation layer. It gives you loose coupling and just incredible flexibility, mainly because only the adapter itself needs to be updated if the external API suddenly changes. The catch? It adds latency. You can think of an adapter like one of those universal travel power plugs. It lets you plug your pristine code into literally any messy wall socket in the world without frying your laptop. But you are adding an extra piece of hardware in the middle. Moving right along to Section 3, managing your surface area. Let's talk about the physics of integration. So whenever you expose your code to the wild, you are fundamentally increasing the total footprint of things that can potentially break. Surface area, by definition, is just the sum of distinct inputs, outputs, and operational touchpoints that an integration exposes. Every single RPC endpoint, every webhook, every CPI target, and every signed payload format, it all adds up. And the larger that surface area, the larger your attack surface. Let's be real for a second. Every new endpoint you add is really just another thing that can silently break and trigger a 3 a.m. pager alarm while you're dead asleep. Nobody wants that. We want to keep this surface area as small and as tightly managed as physically possible. Right, so how do we actually manage it? We use abstraction boundaries. These are explicit seams where responsibilities shift from one component to another, specifically to limit downstream failure. I like to think of abstraction boundaries like a building's shock absorbers during a massive earthquake. They're designed to constrain just how much an upstream protocol's totally busted schema shakes your core logic. If an Oracle provider decides to completely change their JSON response formatting on a random Tuesday, the shock absorber catches it. Your dApp's core settlement logic shouldn't even feel the tremor. Okay, Section 4, building an Oracle adapter. Let's actually walk through a schematic of how this works. So how do we actually build one of these shock absorbers? Let's trace through a typical adapter workflow, one that's specifically designed to normalize erratic events from some hypothetical Oracle into a single, reliable shape. Step 1, you fetch the data from the source. Step 2, you parse the protocol body. This is where you deal with whatever weird, unique idiosyncrasies that specific Oracle decides to throw at you. Step 3, and this is absolutely crucial, you ruthlessly validate the payload. Do not, under any circumstances, silently convert or mask missing fields. If it's broken, reject it entirely. And finally, step 4, you emit a clean, normalized event that your dApp actually expects. From that point on, your downstream code only ever sees that clean, normalized event. No surprises. That brings us to Section 5, operational ownership. This is all about the human element of observability. Here's the truth. An integration, no matter how beautifully architected it is really only as good as the humans operating it. Things will inevitably go offline. A provider will crash, an API will drift. It happens. So we have to assign explicit operational responsibilities. We can actually map our architectural decisions directly to human roles. Take a look at this. First scenario. If you absolutely need an atomic dependency, you use an integration contract, right? Well, the operational ownership for that falls squarely on the on-chain devs. What about frequent schema changes? For that, you use an adopter, and the adopter owner takes responsibility. And for intermittent provider availability, you'd use an adopter with buffering, and you'd assign both the adapter owner and the site reliability engineering team to watch it. By defining this stuff up front, we completely eliminate that classic toxic developer finger pointing when integrations fail. Everyone knows exactly whose pager is supposed to go off.
But to actually support that human element, you have to put specific observability hooks in place. Think of these as your automated guardrails. You need to implement schema validation metrics, track your success and failure counters, keep a close eye on latency histograms, and, of course, aggressively run automated contract tests in CI. These hooks right here, they're the only thing preventing a third-party protocol's silent API drift from totally wrecking your production environment before you even notice something's wrong.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Summary and Next Steps. Let's wrap up this blueprint. As you prepare your candidate protocols for your capstone project, just remember that mastering these hybrid approaches takes some practice. And hey, exploring the broader courses at Forge College is going to give you a massive edge in designing and deploying these complex systems effectively. But if you take away one thing today, let it be this. Operational clarity is as important as code. You must define ownership for monitoring, incident response, and schema updates before you deploy. Yes, the technical trade-offs between tight contracts and off-chain adapters absolutely matter, for sure. But operational clarity, that is what truly keeps your decentralized system alive in the real world. All right, as we wrap up this explainer on the Forge College curriculum and get ready for our next session covering integration architecture patterns, I want to leave you with a challenge. When, and I do mean when, not if, when the external protocol you rely on changes their code overnight, will your dApp stand strong? Or will your users end up paying the price for a brittle integration? Build your boundaries, folks. Make sure to visit forge.college to master these concepts and ensure you have the deep Web3 knowledge you need to reinforce your architecture. Until next time, keep building resilient systems.